Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Haze, and in today's video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do some Frost DK PvP in Arena, double DPS here in Shadowlands Season 1, so you guys can go ahead and get yourself up to that rival mark and get some of that beautiful 220 plus gear. So let's go ahead and jump into this video and talk about this. First up, we're talking about talents. For the level 15 talents, you're going to be using Inoxidable Assault just to increase the overall pressure of your burst damage. This ability can hit up to 12, 13, 1400, maybe a little bit more inside PvP if you're critting. And you add that on top of a large obliterate damage like 6k, 7k, and you're adding that up to about 9k, which actually is a fairly large hit inside PvP when you're blowing cooldowns. As for the level 25 talents, we're going to be using either Runic Attune or Murderous Efficiency. Runic Attune is going to give you a little bit more frost damage pressure, a little bit more healing over time, while Murderous Efficiency is going to give you a little bit more guaranteed burst pressure inside of your burst window, which is really what I like with that because I love hitting hard within that burst window, so I go ahead and go with that. As for the level 30 talents, we're going to be using Blinding Sleet. Now you're probably wondering why I'm using this over Asphyxiate. It's because I have a legendary that I'm going to show you in a little bit that becomes very key for the Frost DK meta in this current season. As for the level 35 talents, you're going to be using Avalanche just for the guaranteed Howling Blast proc damage, just because it actually hits quite a bit hard using Avalanche, so it's not really impressive, but it does add a little bit more consistency and a little bit more overall burst damage when you're throwing back Obliterates and Howling Blast procs. So as for the level 40 talents, you're either going to be using Wraithwalk or Death Pact in terms of double DPS. I do find Death Pact to be very helpful in specific situations, and there's even times where I have to throw it up and it does make me survive burst, and I make it to the other side of the actual DR and survive a little bit longer. But Death Pact is generally something you use when you are just in absolute trouble and have nothing else to rely on. It can save your life quite a bit. As for the level I'd say the level 40 talent, Wraithwalk is also a good option, but in this bursty meta that you're getting just hammered on by rogues and a bunch of other bursty classes that can basically one-shot classes, you're definitely going to want some situational heals that it's really going to save your life when you're doing double DPS situations. But with a healer, Wraithwalk could definitely be a better option. As for level 45 talents, right now if you're playing double DPS, go with Gathering Storms just because the meta is way too bursty for Glacial Advance. And realistically, the overall damage is going to help out quite a bit more than trying to take Hypothermic Presence for overall survivability. Because most likely you will want to play with a class that will add a little bit more to your survivability, or something that's going to have a lot of CC to be able to control a lot of the damage that you're taking from your enemies or other classes that you're fighting. As for level 50 talents, obviously we're taking Obliteration for that big two-handed burst damage is going to be the way to go for PvP. Obviously using a two-hander, not one-hander, since you will get quite a bit more burst pressure out of using a two-hander instead of a one-hander. Now as for PvP talents, Chill Streak is kind of a go-to. It's really like the bread and butter besides your major obliterates on a target. If you get Chill Streak bouncing while landing obliterates, you're talking about 12k plus pumps. Every time you land an obliterate and Chill Streak hits, it's just massive pressure when you line that up correctly, and then also comes into play with Blinding Sleet later on. Now, I was playing with a Rep Paladin, so I obviously went Necrotic Aura because that's going to buff my magic damage by 8%, which makes Obliterate hit harder, and that's going to make my Rep Paladin hit quite a bit harder on the target, so we're overall going to get a little bit more damage out of this. Now, if I was playing Frost DK, Rep Pally, or Frost DK Priest, you could be taking something like Heartstop Aura, but if you find out that the majority of your games aren't going for 40 seconds to a minute, and it isn't going over that, Heartstop Aura probably won't benefit nearly as much in the double DPS 2s category. But as for 3s, I would definitely start adding in Heartstop Aura because it becomes really strong when you're fighting 5-10 minute games. And last but not least, Dome of Ancients. This is kind of your bread and butter for survivability for a lot of classes like Boomies and things like that. Do not use this sparingly inside of Arena, guys. Listen to me when I say this. Do not use this sparingly if you are doing double DPS or you're doing 2s and you come up against a Boomy Rogue team. You need to get out there. You need to really mitigate a lot of that pressure, or things are going to end very badly for you inside of Arena. Next up, we're going to be talking about gear. Now, in this current meta, if you're playing double DPS Frost DK and 2s, you are going to need as much versatility as possible. Right now, I've got 22.20%. Obviously, I've got a couple nice pieces that amplify my versatility up quite a bit. But overall, definitely try to get your versatility as high as possible. Now after that, go ahead and add as much mastery as you can to increase your overall burst pressure if you're obliterates, just to get some massive burst pressure off inside of whether you're laying out big obliterates in your pillar or whether you're throwing chill streaks on targets and lining it up. You're really going to need a lot of mastery, and the more mastery you have, the more that damage is going to be amplified. Now I've heard a lot of people talk about crit. Crit isn't necessarily as important, being that yes, it will give you a little bit more killing machine procs over time, but overtime damage isn't what we're looking for inside PvP. We're looking for damage inside of a burst window that we're going to be setting up with the future stuff that I'm going to be talking about here in a few minutes. So that's why it's very important to stack as much mastery as possible just for overall damage. Now talking about gear, as I said, you need versatility, you need mastery. But outside of that, like if you don't have it, just find a piece with high versatility, and any kind of off stat, whether it's haste or crit, will both benefit you very well, and it won't really matter which one of those you're on as long as you're stacking the ever-living credit of versatility. Now when it comes to legendary items, obviously try to fill a slot that is like verse crit or verse haste, replace that with your legendary item like verse mastery. And then of course you want the effect of absolute zero. Now this is where like the stun keeps coming from with my dragon. A lot of people were asking about that. Frostworm's Fury has a 50% reduced cooldown, which means it's on a minute and a half. Use that quite often. Lines up perfectly with every other burst, not every burst. And then, of course, it also freezes the enemies for 3 seconds. Now, 3 seconds doesn't really sound like a lot, but it's definitely enough, even when DR'd, to land a kill in certain situations. And that's one of the things that we're playing off in Arena right now that's really giving us an edge when combined with Blinding Sleet. And, of course, kicks, and let's say your Pally's Hodges or your Windwalker's Stun. But realistically, this setup is obviously the most important part of Frost DK bursting inside of Arena. Real quick, talking about weapon enchants, you can either use Razor Eyes, which will give you a little bit more guaranteed frost damage, which most likely in terms of threes might be a little bit more beneficial, but at the same time, Rune of the Fallen Crusader is going to proc and give you more burst damage during that. Now, like me, I'm Necrolord, so I'm going to be getting a little bit of extra strength increase, so adding more strength increase to that percentage gained for me is most likely going to be more beneficial than me taking, than something like comparing it to Kyrian, which is going to give you mastery, which gives you more frost damage, isn't necessarily going to scale nearly as heavy for you if you're using if you were using Razor Eyes over Fallen Crusader. So that's why it's a little bit better for us Necrolords to be running Fallen Crusader versus Kyrians running Razor Eyes. Next up, let's talk about Soulbind. So I'm obviously Necrolord. If you're Kyrian, you'll have to go something else. I'm pretty sure Pelagos is pretty good, but I heard it's getting like a 50% nerf coming up literally tomorrow, or obviously might be same day at the point that this video comes out, sometime around 7, 8 a.m. in the morning. But anyways, getting into these Soulbinds, now obviously Lead by Example is really strong because it increases your strength by 5%, and that also applies in with that strength scaling like I was talking about with Fallen Crusader, which makes it a little bit stronger than it previously would. Now it does buff your partner, like me, I've got a Ret Pellet, it does massive amounts of burst pressure and then slows down on a little bit of consistency over time. You gain 2% additional strength for each ally affected. That gives you 2% strength and him an extra 2% strength if it's popped while he's on top of us. So it's very good that he's standing on top of you, and most likely you're going to want that anyways, being how you set up burst. Now going down, we've got the Potency Conduit, Unleash Frenzy. Now this causes your Frost Strike to increase your strength up to 1.4% for 6 seconds. Again, you have massive strength scaling, especially if you're a Necrolord. That's going to increase your overall damage of your Obliterates, being that you're getting obviously the strongest stat, your main stat, Strength. Very nice. It'll increase it by like 400 or 500 damage most of the time. It is fairly good to have it, and definitely worth taking. As for these, basically I'm just going down the left side to grab up the Potency Conduit for that extra strength. And then down here at the Finesse Conduit, I need to get a little bit better one than that. I'm taking the Fleeting Wind Conduit just to increase my speed. Now, I kind of would like a Defense Conduit over there, but, it's just the extra strength's too good. It hits a little bit too hard for me, and for my liking, I like to have a little bit more damage pressure than normal with my conduits. So let's cover how to deal damage. There's going to be a lot of different ways to deal pressure in Arena, and a lot of different reactions I found out how to kind of fight different targets differently. So it's going to be kind of all over the place, really, how to open on something. But let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, the one-shotting rogues, because obviously I think that's the biggest thing. Even, I'd say the majority of classes are definitely having some kind of complaint about. So what I figured out about rogues is, obviously they do a lot of damage. But anyways, so what I figured out about them is generally they're going to come in and they're going to cheap shot you. Generally, if you're playing a rogue comp, you are going to want a PvP trinket. Using a Will to Survive trinket is a fairly good way to go, but the problem is, if you get rooted and silenced by, let's say, like a Boomy's root and a Solar Beam, you are not going to be able to get away from that burst, and you're almost guaranteed dead in that situation. So you are going to need a medallion to remove yourself out of Rogue's opener, if they're playing like Rogue Boomy. I mean, even probably like Rogue Ret would be pretty terrifying in that case too. But overall, you're going to need that to like get out of that first stun, because if you sit that stun or you even sit partial of that stun, you're most likely going to take your entire health pool as damage. Now, what the Rogue is most likely going to do is he's not going to cloak right away, because most rogues don't expect people to come out of it that fast, and they usually want to keep cloak for them to be able to re-stealth. So the first thing you're going to do when you go ahead and trinket that damage is you're going to either blind the rogue or you're going to stun him with your dragon. Now, you can also go asphyxiate, which is capable of stunning rogues with their cloak on. So there really is no way to avoid it if you're running asphyxiate. That is a fairly good counter off the opener to be able to do that, but keep in mind that is going to DR your Froststorm's Fury quite a bit more, and that's one of the only ways I've been able to relieve pressure off a rogue and be able to stop his damage. Like, your main goal is to stop him from dealing damage for like 3 to 5 seconds, and if you're capable of doing that, you'll be able to survive through the opener of the burst quite a bit more. And realistically, you're only also trying to survive until your partner can get out of CC, whether he's in a blind, whether he's in a sap, or something along those lines. He also is going to need a medallion, being that he's most likely going to get hit with a full blind, and during that time you could also die very quickly. Now, that being said, once you stun the target, what are you going to do? If it's like Rogue Boomy, you're instantly going to go into an anti-magic zone. There's no other way about it, because that Rogue and Boomy are going to attempt to one-shot the living crud out of you. And again, your entire play at this point is just survival. You're not dealing pressure, you're not dealing damage, your partner could be bursting, he can do whatever he wanted, but your goal right now is survival. Now, you're going to open up as hard as you can on, let's say, Mr. Rogue, and this is kind of where the damage comes in. I'll go ahead and show you from that. So we're standing there, right? Rogue comes up to you, you're standing there, boom, Rogue opens up on you. What you're going to do is hit Will to Survive real quick, and whether you decide to use your blind or your dragon. Now, the one thing nice about dragon is it can actually like fly through before it ever shows the visual effect of it, so rogues won't even know it's coming most of the time, so keep that in mind. So you're going to trinket, pop around, boom, dragon, rogue stunned. He's got 3 seconds on that. You can even kite him, throw this up, put dots on him, keep him from going invis, and once you've kind of lived out that 3 to 5 seconds, he's most likely going to shadow step you, and at this point he might actually kidney, so be ready on that Icebound Fortitude. Also be ready on, let's say, anti-magic shell or something along this point, because you're most likely going to be taking damage from an alternate source, trying to survive to your partner. It's absolute insane damage, and that's why you got to be very quick on this. Alright, so once you've popped around, things are setting up, you've kept that rogue out a little bit, what you're going to do is come back and burst, you're going to throw up your pillar, your empower, you're going to throw up your grip, and you're going to hit a Howling Blast to get a guaranteed obliterate proc, and that's when you're going to go into your burst, and just start dropping these massive bombs on top of them. Just start dropping in the house. You can just bring the house down on that rogue's head as hard as you can, right? And that's kind of what you do. Now, you also have your blind, which if the rogue reopens, let's say you get stunned, you've got IBF, he reopens, blind the rogue. Now, what you're really trying to do is basically counter anytime that rogue opens on you. Now, there will be awkward times where the rogue opens up and you don't either A, have a counter, or B, have a way out. And that's why I like playing with the Ret Paladin, so he can bop me fresh out of, let's say, a second stun or something like that. If the rogue realizes he's going to counter me every time I open on him, what I'm going to do is open up with a cloak. And when he does that, you definitely need to rely on some kind of counter or CC from a partner at that point. It really needs to have some kind of synergy to counter rogues. It's extremely hard. They deal a lot of pressure. I know there is some damage nerfs coming into rogues. I believe also boomies within the near future. But yeah, overall, rogues are probably one of the hardest to counter when playing Frosty K when it comes to double DPS scenarios. Alright, so now that we've covered sub-rogues, let's cover the next bursty class that's giving people a lot of trouble, and that's Ret Paladins. Now, the reason why I know how to counter Ret Paladins, because obviously I duel my twos partner quite often, and I know what it's like to be hit by a Ret Paladin that hits very hard. Alright? So, dealing with Ret Paladins. Now, the one thing you could say about them is you know somebody's going to get hit, you know somebody's going to get nearly one-shotted. The one thing that we have to counter Ret Paladins, remember when we took Dome of Ancient Shadows, that is an 80% damage reduction. So you're looking for one single thing when it comes to a Paladin. I mean, kind of two things at most. You're looking for either the barrier that they put up that basically absorbs damage and explodes after, dealing a massive amount of pressure, and you're also looking for wings, both of which are fully capable of dealing 50 to 100% of somebody's health in absolutely no time. So you need to watch out for kind of both of those. Now, as for what are you going to do against a Ret Paladin that's going to do that? So let's act like this is a Ret Paladin right here. I'm running at the Ret Paladin, whether he's with the healer, doesn't really matter what up comes next. If he's with the rogue, obviously apply rogue rules to what you're doing. Throw anti-magic shell very quickly. Now, we're going to go ahead and open up on this target. Now, we're going to go in, we're going to throw up our pillar, throw up our power. We're just going to go really ham on this Ret Paladin up front as possible. This is obviously going to force the Paladin to have to play fairly defensive in comparison to us. Now, let's say the Ret Paladin pops his wings right now. I'm going to go bam with my anti-magic shell, anti-magic zone, to reduce all of his damage by 80%. This is the only way you as a Frost DK are going to survive your Ret Paladin's burst. Do not leave this under any circumstances or for any reason, or you will end up dead inside of a Ret Paladin's burst. Now, after that, keep your anti-magic shell when fighting a Ret Paladin for sure, because what's going to happen is he's most likely going to pop his wings very soon, and you want to be very careful of that because it's going to hurt really bad. And once you obviously see wings or something along those lines, you're going to go ahead and repop your anti-magic shell and to keep applying damage. Now, damage rotation's fairly simple. Obviously, you keep up more as much when you can, dump as much runes into it, and if you got a Howling Blast proc, use that. Outside of that, if you don't have anything, you're just going to hit some Frost Strikes. You got an Obliterate there. We're going to generate that, use the Howling Blast proc, go back to our Frost Strikes. Very easy to do overall, not very hard. Once you've got burst back up, you throw up your burst, you get yourself an Obliterate proc, and you start dealing massive pressure, and you just kind of recycle that over and over again, hitting the target extremely hard. Fairly simple for Pallies. Now let's go ahead and talk about what we do basically against every other comp in the game. Next up, we're going to talk about basic strategy for basically fighting any other comp in the game. Now, you need to remember you also need to be using defensives during these comps when they use their burst. If it's Enhancement Shaman and he's hitting you obviously with his lightning elemental attacks, you're going to throw down AMZ or you're going to pop AMS. If it's a warrior, you're not going to use AMS, you're not going to use AMZ because he's not going to deal a lot of damage. Now, if you get rooted in, let's say, the warrior's Kyrian ability, the spear that keeps you in place, so he's going to blade storm you, hit you with that awesome legendary that procs mortal strikes, what you're going to want to do is actually use Death's Advance to walk right out of that thing. That warrior's going to be like, okay, I didn't see that coming. He just walked out of this. I didn't get any damage off. That's quite crazy. Now, that's awesome. But anyways, talking about how you fight a pretty much every other class in the game currently on a Frost DK is really what you're looking for is what we call either goes or setups. And that's going to be coming with obviously PvP here. So what we got is, like, let's say this is healer and this is the DPS. Now, what we're looking for is, it doesn't matter who this DPS is on, whether it's on me or my rep partner, what we're going to do is take this DPS and we're going to drag it as far as we can over here next to the healer. Now, the reason we're doing that, I need my turnip for this. Where is my toy box? There it is. Alright, we're going to need turnip for this. Let's say we dragged this DPS all the way over to the healer here. Now, we're about to burst on, let's say, this healer. Because most of the time, playing red DPS, we did, or double DPS with a red, we did kill the healer a lot of the time. So we're going to start out with, obviously, if we want to switch, let's say we're going to deal a lot of pressure to this DPS. We're going to full burst, right after the switch. So we're going to blind the healer. We're going to full burst on this target, come in heavy on him right as the healer's about to come out. He's going to hit him with a Hodge. Right now the healer is Hodge, that's Ret Pally CC, and we're full bursting on this target right here. The healer's going to get gripped in. At this point is when I turn, shoot the dragon and stun, and I throw out my chill streak while the targets are standing right next to each other, applying maximum pressure. That's the setup. You want to basically blind the target, hit him with Hodge, and hopefully you're going to force a trinket at that point. And then at the point that they trinket that is when the dragon comes out. And that's where they're kind of gripped in, obviously, using Abomination Limb. So they're going to be standing right next to each other. And that's where I come in with the setup with Chill Streak. Now, obviously, there's more than one way to do this. You can set up focus macros like I have here to focus grip the healer over to the target. And set up the same kind of CC train. You do not need Abomination Limb to set this up. Kyrian can also do it. But Kyrian obviously is getting that nerf coming in for 50%. Which is going to be pretty crazy to see. How many people switch over to Necro after that big old Kyrian nerf. So that's kind of the setup you're looking for. You want to start up on the target, hitting them, pulling them in, getting that healer out a little bit, blinding the healer, coming back in on the target, Ret Pally Hodges, and then of course I line it up, grip the healer in, and then we go for the Chill Streak. Based on how much damage you deal to any target there, or how badly you catch the healer, and let's say, you know, you've DPS'd him down, you've got him extremely low, and then you throw a focus kick over on the healer. That's how you land kills. That's the major setup. This is the same setup in 2s as you're also going to be using in 3s. This is how you land kills inside of Arena. This is how you deal massive burst pressure on a Frost DK. And really anything, whether it's Battlegrounds, Rated Battlegrounds, or Arena, that's how you're going to maximize your damage. And that's why Frost DKs work so well with like Windwalker DK, Ret DK, things like that, that also have some kind of survivability to add to a Frost DK. And they also have some kind of either AoE CC or a stun that you can go ahead and coordinate that burst off of. And that's why this Frost DK legendary called Absolute Zero is so important, because you don't need that AoE stun from a monk to be fully capable of setting that up. And that's what actually makes Frost Ret so viable currently, is that you're capable of setting up that massive CC burst train, which is going to allow you to have full uptime on the target, and it's also going to allow your Ret Paladin to have full uptime, so he's going to be able to use that burst, because the meanest thing any class in the game can do is kite a Ret Paladin. So if you're a Necrolord Frost DK, you are not going to be able to let these targets go. They aren't going to get away if you throw up Abomination Limb. You throw that up, and most likely every target, every ranged, anything that's going to run from you is going to be gripped back in. You're going to hold them right here, and you and that Ret Paladin are going to do absolute massive burst pressure during your go. It gives you quite a bit more mechanical strength with lining up the all-important burst. That's how you do like that big damage. That's how in some of those games you see me out-damaging the Ret Paladin by a fairly big margin. Next up, we're talking about survivability. First thing we need to address, obviously, is some macros here. I do not have my macros under there. I have them under here. So first up, we've got, obviously, the Lichborn heal macro. You pop Lichborn. I'm not using Hypothermic Presence, so it doesn't matter that it's in there. And then, of course, we got Cast at Hazzed Death Coils. Very simple macro. What's going to allow you to do is pop Lichborn and pump Death Coils into yourself for survivability. Now, versus specific classes like Rogues and things like that, this is going to be a definite need, and you also have seen how quick I burst on targets. There's also another reason for that. The quicker I burst, the more chance I'm going to have Runic Power, and the more chance I'm going to be able to hit Lichborn. Now, while you're bursting, you'll notice that your Lichborn heals actually heal for a much bigger amount than if you're not bursting, based on how much strength you're getting, because the harder your Lichborn, your Death Coils hit for, the harder your heals are going to hit for. So let's say we're full bursting on a target, that rogue's also nuking the ever-living crud out of me, and I need to get some healing off. I'm full bursting, I've got a ton of strength going, and I pop Lichborn on myself. Those Death Coils are healing me for 6.2k, and that's not even as crazy as they can get. They can actually get quite a bit crazier than that. And of course, having Empower and stuff like that up, you can actually heal your entire health pool if you do it with a full bar of Runic Power. Now, a lot of the times, I find myself with half to 3/4 when fighting a rogue, but even just popping off a couple of those during that burst pressure is actually going to allow you to survive much better in that time period than if you just obviously trying to Death Strike. Now, you see Death Strike here, healing point for 3.6k, which overall is much weaker than those Death Coils off popped within our major burst cooldowns. Now, the other thing you're going to want to do is obviously use a Ghoul Sank. Ghoul Sank is going to heal for quite a bit. It's going to heal for 7.4k. Now, obviously, as you can see, the Death Coil heal during burst is going to be quite a bit more. So, definitely resort to using your Lichborn heal survivability when you need to, when you're like getting one-shotted by targets, because it's going to hurt really bad, guys, and you're really going to need to rely on your greatest healing abilities during that time. Now, Death Strikes obviously are a fairly good healing ability to weave in through normal combat, because it heals you for part of the amount of damage that you've taken for the past 5 seconds. So you don't want to just sit there and hammer on your Death Strikes as hard as you can trying to heal up, and the reason being is they aren't going to heal very much. But if you take a little damage while you're wanting to Death Strike, let's see if I can take enough damage here. See, he's doing some damage to me. I'm going to throw up a Death Strike, and as you can see, my Death Strike healing actually healed for 7.2k, which is as strong as the Lichborn healing in comparison to, let's say, a normal Death Strike, which is 3.6k, which overall is going to give you better survivability by weaving it, because, as you've noticed, that one Death Strike after taking a bit of damage healed for twice as much as these Death Strikes, and being that you have a limited runic power pool, you're really trying to maximize the amount you're healing for, while also maximizing how little runic power you're using on your healing capability, so you overall can get more healing in the long run. So definitely don't try to spam those Death Strikes. If you have no other choice, just go for it. But overall, if you're not taking a ton of damage, you've kind of managed to situate yourself, definitely resort to kind of just using those here and there. Now, as for Death Pact, that is a last resort. You've got to have no health. You've got to be pushed into the corner, no cooldowns. Your partner doesn't have anything for you. You're about to get killed. Now, one of the things you can do, obviously, is try to use immunities before you Death Pact, because that will save you quite a bit more time if that's possible, like AMS Death Pact. Hopefully you don't take a lot of damage during this, because you will not be able to heal while this is up. So you can't resort, if you get enough runic power, back to Death Striking, because most likely they're going to be absorbed with this target. Now obviously you can heal through it, but overall falling more behind doesn't necessarily pan out well, and kind of playing yourself to be able to make some kind of jump back. Like, also I know that playing with the Ret Paladin, if you plan on using Death Pact and he bubbles you at the same time, that's also a fairly good way to do it, because you stop taking damage for a very short amount of time, and you'll also have enough time to actually heal through it. It just kind of saves you at least at least for a couple of seconds. It'll save you inside of arena, at least to survive long enough to deal pressure and deal damage. So the last question we're going to be answering for this video is this viable outside of double DPS 2s? Yes, this is also the build that Frosty Ks are using in 3s. It's actually fairly good. The more people there are, the more chance you're going to be able to pull off this nasty burst, and obviously kill some targets very fast. Now, if I was going to do 1v1s, I probably wouldn't go with this, but that's a subject for an absolutely different video. Anyways, guys, if you have any questions about this, you're having struggles with certain comps, certain things, you can go ahead and comment down below. But anyways, guys, if you like this video, leave a like. And of course, until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.